class, I'm going to go over the 10 tips for writing survey and interview questions. First, you want to keep it short. So you want to avoid too many open-ended questions in your survey. So in general, people want to complete a survey in about 5 minutes tops. So the more that you give them the opportunity to just check a box, the more likely people will take your survey. So for instance, how could Americans support their community during the pandemic? Check all that apply. And so you're allowing them to just check the things that they would like to do, or maybe have done if you want to make it past tense, and then give them the option to fill in the blank. You want to keep your questions neutral. So do not ask biased questions. So this is a common mistake that students will make. And so, for instance, you don't want to ask, there are many people who believe that online learning is a problem. Are you one of them? Right? So you're kind of already assuming that they believe it's a problem. So instead, you want to ask a more neutral question. Do you agree or disagree that online learning is a problem? This is a common issue with interview questions or even survey questions. You want to just ask one question at a time. So don't ask 2 or more questions in a single question. So for instance, you don't want to ask, do you agree that online learning is a problem and that faculty should do something about it? Okay, so just ask one question. You want to avoid confusing or ambiguous questions. You want to be specific, okay? So what do you think about the COVID-19 pandemic? Right, so the question is vague because it's like, okay, what exactly are you asking? You know, are you wanting to know about coloring my hair or learning the guitar or flattening the death curve, funding higher education? So it's so vague and open-ended. It could be about anything. So whether it's an interview or a survey, you know, you are asking people for their time, and most people don't have too much time to try to guess and figure out like what you want. And so if you want people to take your survey, definitely you want to be specific and clear. Now you want to avoid yes or no questions, or too many of them actually. And so, for instance, if you ask, have you baked homemade bread before? Then someone will say no, and then you're like, okay, kind of faced with the wall of silence. And when we ask these questions, we're like hoping that they say yes, and we're hoping that they will elaborate. But you have to keep in mind that some people, in fact, will just say no. And if all your questions are yes, no questions, and they say no, let's say 10 times, you finished your interview in 1 minute. It may sound like a blessing because you're like, great, I got my work done sooner than later. But then now you have less than a minute of material to work with. And so this is not going to help you produce your podcast or your mini documentary. You need material. You need people to elaborate. Okay, so these are the kinds of elaboration questions that you would want to ask. What is the process for baking bread at home? Right? So people would have to describe that. What should home bakers avoid when baking bread? Right? So you can get them to talk about the various things that you would want to avoid. And in your opinion, why do so few millennials know how to bake bread? Okay, so the more you can ask why questions, the more likely people will elaborate during your interview. You want to provide a balanced set of options. So this applies to the surveyors. So if you're asking, you know, a question where you're giving people options, and the options are just all positive, so extremely helpful, very helpful, or helpful, well, you're not really giving people the option to vote unhelpful, and you're not giving them the option to actually be neutral on the matter. Okay, so you want to make sure you provide enough of a range of options there. And which leads me to about being consistent and clear. So for those of you who are using a Likert scale, you want to clarify what the range is. So don't just have a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. You got to let people know what the 1 means and what the 10 means. So on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being very satisfied with the movie and 1 being very unsatisfied, how would you rate Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker? Okay, so then if the next question was about Infinity War, you want to be consistent. So 1 should still mean very bad, and 10 should still mean very good. So you don't want to flip that scale. That will confuse people. Okay. Avoid negative questions. Now, this is a classic problem. So in a survey, you have to watch out for questions that use sort of a negative. How likely are you not to vote this November? So when you have these options, very likely, likely, neutral, unlikely, the problem here is if you picked very likely, right? So basically you're saying that, it's very likely that I'm not going to vote. That is really confusing for people. So if you actually were going to vote, that means you're actually supposed to pick unlikely. So that means you are not unlikely to vote. So that means you will. So as you can see, it's really confusing logic for most people to follow. Okay, so avoid the negative questions. And for the interviewers out there, you need to focus more on listening. So this is an opportunity for a participant to share their expertise, their perspective, their opinions. So you need to listen more than talk. Okay, so this is a great opportunity for you to hear someone's story, someone's truth, and take plenty of notes. Even if you're recording it, you want to take notes because then you can ask follow-up questions. But also, too, when you take notes, it functions like a type of an outline, right? So then when you go back to the footage, especially during post-editing, it's kind of easier to find like where in the interview something was said, okay? Because especially if an interview goes on for a while, sometimes they can go on for like 20, 30 minutes, and you have to go back to that to do post-edits, like let's say a week later or something. It just takes forever to find the clip that you want to use, okay? So take notes during the interview and help you create like somewhat like an outline. And then make sure you end the interview with, is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to share? You'll be surprised. Like you always get people offering some really interesting stories or examples. So give people that option. At times, of course, you can even ask that on a survey as well. So the surveyors can use that technique as well. And last, testing 1, 2, 3. So before you conduct an interview, test your equipment and microphone, especially with your devices. You need to see if you're going to have enough space on your device to be able to produce and edit and so forth. So like for instance, a 12-minute video file can easily be 1 gigabyte. So check to see if that's going to be a problem on your phone, especially if you don't have 1 gigabyte available on your phone. And also see if you have that space available on your laptop. Okay, so definitely test it out before doing the actual interview. Make sure everything works well. And if you're doing a survey, you want to consider even asking close friends and family who are not actually part of the survey. Just ask them to take the survey just to see if there's anything misleading or confusing. Okay, so they'll do like a trial run. And of course, if you are doing an interview or survey, you do need to submit all your questions to me first before you can distribute them. Okay, and I will give you some feedback, and then you'll revise it. And to actually produce the survey, if you are doing a survey, then you'll want to use Google Forms. And final note, for those who are doing interviews, you will need to copy and paste this message to your participants, okay? So with your written consent, I would like to conduct an interview for a research project in my academic writing course at Ithaca College. I will use audio and/or video footage for educational purposes only. Although I may edit portions of your audio or video footage for the purpose of my research project, I will not misrepresent the intentions of your message or narrative. If you prefer to be anonymous, I will use a pseudonym or obscure your identity in the video footage. And anytime, if you wish to withdraw your audio video footage, I will do so immediately. If you wish to view a draft of my project, I can email you a copy. If you have any questions regarding the objectives of this research project, please contact Dr. Mary Lourdes Silva at msilva@ithaca.edu. If you would like to participate in my research project, please reply to this email. Yes, I give written consent to participate in an interview and allow This is where they put your name to use my audio or video footage for their research project. Okay, so even if this is your mom or this is your sister or your best friends, it doesn't matter. You will just email them this message here and then ask them to reply so that way you can proceed with the interview. Okay, so this is to protect the participants in the event there's something delicate or vulnerable or triggering that they share in their interviews. They have at any time the right to withdraw that information. Okay, so all right, so I look forward for all of those who are doing interviews or surveys. I look forward to reading your survey questions and interview questions.